I also want to now just take a moment to welcome back Dr. Alan Berkowitz. You can get a sense of why we brought him here to Syracuse. His expertise in the area of prevention and connecting that to elder abuse and elder justice is going to take our community to the next level. And welcome back, Alan.
Can folks hear me well in the back? So don't be shy if it's not going back there, I'll use the mic. So I would say it's going to help take you to the next level, right? So this is really like in some way a repeat of before, but slower and going into more depth. And there's also a chance for people to ask questions, because I didn't have, a lot of time before. And so if some of it's the same material, we could talk about it. Somebody made a comment to me before that I think is very important, which is they said, well, I would always tell my mother to dye her gray hair so people would treat her differently. So I want us to think about, I don't want anyone to feel guilty like if they're tinting their hair, or, that's not the point. The point is to think about why you're doing it.
Alan, can you wear the microphone?
Yes.
Yes, that would be helpful.
See, she's an active bystander.
I am.
Not a passive bystander. You need to think about why you're doing it and decide if that's why you should be doing it. So, for example, if an older person will be discriminated against because they're gray, and they don't want to incur that disadvantage, and they make a conscious decision to counter the ageism of our society. It's a coping mechanism. We call it a risk reduction strategy. But they're not doing it because they're hopefully not doing it because they have low self-esteem and they think that changing their hair will help them feel better about themselves. So I'll give you a different example. I don't usually wear a sport jacket, right? I already have my change of clothes ready for when I leave. If you go to a professional conference, African American men with the same everything as me, same education, same this, same that, maybe more, they're almost always dressed better than me, than white folks like me. Why? Because the way the racism comes, they have to show that they're not what people think. So they have to overdress. That's a strategy. It shouldn't be that way, but it's probably not going away tomorrow. So we adopt strategies to cope with the environment. And we make conscious choices. And if somebody decides to dye their hair as a conscious choice to cope with the ageism of the environment, that's a conscious choice. But it's different from doing it like out of a sense of inferiority. Because that isn't really going to solve the real problem. So I just want to back off what I said a little and give a little more information. And I think the comment about someone would advise their mother to dye her hair is very profound. Because that person, she doesn't feel insecure about her mother. She loves her mother. But she knows how her mother is going to be treated. Now another solution is someone says, if they treat me that way, that's their problem. I'm not going to let them treat me that way. So it's always more complicated than we think, but if we're aware of the complexities, then we'll do a better job of whatever we're doing. And if we think it's simplistic, some people that have simplistic ideas about things, they get depressed when they listen to me. Because it's like not simple, so I'm going to take that away from you. But once you take it away and you see how complicated it is, then you can navigate it and you can work with it and you can do something. So, I hope everyone isn't shy this time, because some of the things are the same, but the critical issues, talk more about bystander, talk more about social norms. I'll go into the case studies in more depth. And just as I said in my introduction, most of this research is drawn from sexual assault prevention. So we need to adapt it to elder abuse. We just can't run out and do the same things because there's certain universals that apply to everything and there's certain specifics that apply to the issue. I'll give you a different example. Most people who drink alcohol don't plan to stop drinking alcohol, including alcohol abusers. But most people who smoke cigarettes would like to stop smoking. So when we have a social norms campaign for cigarette use, we always put information at the bottom about where to get anti-smoking resources. Because let's say the ecology of the issue is different. So while I believe in these best practices and that we can use them to prevent and reduce elder abuse, we need to adapt them. And then we need to adapt them further to the different communities in our county or our region, because there's a lot of cultural and ethnic differences about how I mean, just go to the Haudenosaunee, go down to Onondaga, right? I mean, I'm not speaking with specific knowledge of them, but in general, Native communities are much more respecting of elders and honoring of elders. I mean, in some tribes, they have a political organ that makes the decisions about the tribe, but then they have a council of elders. That's also an official group, and the, quote, politicians are always going them to ask their advice. So we can look around and see how it's set up in other environments and cultures and learn from them. So, prevention programs must be theory-based, research-driven, and adapted appropriately. So, what are you all going to do? We don't have research on elder abuse. We hope to. So you find out what are the best practices for sexual assault prevention or sexual harassment prevention or drug abuse prevention that's supported by research and science, and then you adapt it to elder abuse prevention. So you're still being accountable to the research, but you don't ignore the research, because these are like proven practices, but you have to adapt them. If we're doing a drug trial, and all the tests have been done on white men, then we can't recommend the same dose for women, because women's bodies metabolize drugs differently, including there's ethnic differences in the way people's bodies metabolize drugs. So if you're a psychiatrist, you have to know the dose-specific things for gender and culture or race. So even though we don't have a lot of research on elder abuse prevention, we are accountable to the knowledge of prevention to apply it in an intelligent way. So we must understand the problem, and that's why I started out by talking about the big, big picture. So you can see, like, there's a lot of agriculture not too far from here. Depending on what minerals are in the soil, certain things will grow and certain things won't grow. So we want to look at the minerals in the soil that are allowing elder abuse to take place. And we need to address the barriers and challenges. And then we need to create the infrastructures. Now, I was very impressed when I started paying attention to what Vera House and the Elder Social Justice and the other groups you have in the Syracuse area. I think you have a very good infrastructure, and you're doing a lot of really good collaboration, and other counties are learning from you. From Onondaga. So the question then is, how do you use that infrastructure to create good prevention programs? And that means everyone just doesn't run out and do their own thing. It means you see how it all fits together and who's working on what and how. So we were just talking about an anti-racism effort, and they were saying that they would like to use the bystander techniques for that. The chart is the same. But then when they do an anti-racism workshop, they can say, you know, this applies to elder abuse, and if you know someone in your community, and it just takes 30 seconds, and they're advertising what you're doing, and then you do the same, and that's how we make it work. See, I don't have so much room anymore, so you don't have to work the camera so much. Leadership must model what we want for the community. Now, when you talk about social norms, very often the leaders foster the misperception. So remember, if a lot of people aren't doing something, and most people think that most people are doing something, more people do it. And if the leaders of the community say, remember the Music Man, River City, if the leaders in the community bang the tables and say, we have a crisis of opiate abuse, and opiate abuse is this, hardly anybody is doing opiate abuse. But the people who are dying, so we need to pay attention to it. I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm saying if you exaggerate it, then it makes it more normal. It makes people more likely to do it. It makes it seem like it's everywhere. And we know this for sure with alcohol. So you have to talk about it in the right way, which most people aren't doing it, but you might know someone who's doing it, and here's what you need to look for. And very often our leaders are part of the problems, because we want to get people's attention. I want you to give money to my nonprofit, right? That's okay. But then I do it in a way that inflames the perception, and that's actually doing harm. So we need to look always at how we talk about the issue. And because leaders are more visible, we need to look at how leadership talks about the issue. And it's a community-wide process, and efforts must be adapted and modified over time. So any comments so far? The first person who speaks is always doing me a favor, because then more people raise their hand. Thank you.
Yes, Donna.
Did you want to say something?
Oh, absolutely.
You don't need to stand up. I'll hear you.
My name is Donna Reese. I'm an outreach specialist at Aurora Central, New York. Among my many duties, I facilitate our monthly vision loss support group.
So is there a question? Excuse me?
Yep. My
Okay.
thing is, how can we include the disability community in this effort to fight elder abuse, because we can be the most vulnerable because of the loss of our vision? How do we get the word out and network with other groups
Okay,
to
thank
include
you.
us?
So we remember, if abuse is an exploitation of vulnerability, a blind or deaf person has vulnerabilities that another person doesn't. So we need to talk about the interconnections. And we need to, when we talk about elder abuse, we could also mention, this is true also if someone has a hearing problem or a sight problem or whatever, but we need to make the interconnections so that when I'm a bystander to an elder abuse situation, I also intervene when I see someone not treating you respectfully in the supermarket. So that's very important to see the interconnections. So as I said, we need to develop mutually reinforcing synergistic programs. One intervention alone or disconnected interventions will not change the climate. So you can go to a conference and like find out the best workshop and get everyone in Syracuse to do the best workshop. And if it's the best workshop, it will last for 6 months and then it will go away, including my own. I have a case study of one of mine. When she said, see, Jenny was nice to me because she said, my workshop reduced sexual assaults by 75% after 4 months. That's true. Guess what? After 7 months, it was all gone. So what happened? Where did it go? We didn't sustain it. We didn't boost it. We didn't reinforce it. We didn't build on it. Because no workshop is going to change everything. So we need to really think about it all together at the same time. So we don't do scattershot programming. So usually when we want to solve a problem, we always focus on the negative. What do we want to get rid of? But we need to talk about what do we want to encourage. So we talk about elder abuse. What attitudes do we want to encourage? That I would speak to my neighbor if I saw something going on, that if I wanted to say something but I didn't, we would create an environment where I felt comfortable saying something. So the prevention research shows that focusing on the positive is more effective. So if we want to talk about opiate use, which is really scary, and I was talking to someone yesterday from Portland County who has an agency and they're supposed to deal with opiate abuse. And they're getting all this money and they're supposed to talk about it in the high schools, but nobody's doing it in the high schools. So it's like, what am I supposed to say? What attitudes and behaviors do we want to encourage that one day those people won't take opiates? That's prevention. What do we want to discourage? how can leadership incentivize what we want and disincentivize what we don't want? So I was talking to the deputy mayor because she was really nodding her head because a lot of this applies to politics. And the people in the false consensus group who think they speak for everyone are really wasting a lot of her time. So we need to figure out a way for the leaders to say, you know, Alan, we really care about what you think, and you're a very strong leader and an outspoken person in this community, but I need a week before I get back to you. And then you do some polling and you come back and you say, you know, Alan, I'm in a little dilemma because 80% of the people I spoke to don't agree with you. And if you do a good poll, it's not like just my friends who aren't representative. So we need to have the leaders do things to incentivize what we want and disincentivize what we don't want. And by the way, if a leader does a poll, that's incentivizing democracy, because everyone has a voice.
Unlike alcohol abuse and sexual abuse, there's, I think, another level here also, which is the support and education of caregivers. How does that come to play in with it?
Well, see, this is where you all know more than me about elder abuse, but we talk about, so we need to support and educate the caregivers, and we need to also educate the bystanders of the caregivers. Because if I'm a good caregiver and I want to do the right thing, I might still have certain stresses, and the people around me need to know how to support me with those stresses or what are the resources. But if I'm a caregiver who is potentially abusive, the bystanders around the caregiver need to know what to look for and how to intervene. So you have to take your specific expertise, which I don't have, and then relate it to the general knowledge that we have about prevention, and that would be an example. Because in these other issues, we don't have caregivers. So elder abuse prevention has to consider the role of the caregiver, because that's critical, especially when it's hidden because it takes place in the family. So let me think, I thought of an example. My wife and I travel a lot. So when we travel a lot, we use our credit card in funny ways. So we're always getting notices, is this a valid, you know, did you make this expense, yes or no? Why can't we do that for elders' credit cards? The deputy mayor spoke about a daughter who was giving money to the neighbor. If she was getting the bank account statements every month, she would have seen the money wasn't going where it was supposed to. So it's not just about wanting to do the right thing and trusting people. It's about building into the system the triggers that will alert us to when there are problems. And then, if I'm the person who's going to steal the money that is meant for my neighbor, I'm less likely to do it if you're the daughter and I know that you're getting the statement every month. So we just need to create a whole system that's a protective system. And a lot of you are already doing that, but now we need to do it as a prevention mechanism, not as a response mechanism. That's where we're at this new phase of really pushing into prevention. And that's why you invited me, because even though you know more than I do about elder abuse, I know a lot about prevention. Does that answer your question? Are you satisfied? Okay. Okay, so that's what I just said, right? What channels can be created to identify warning signs and respond to them? And that's creating systems, like in Toronto, where I spoke with my wife at an elder abuse conference. They have a system for training bank tellers to notify abuse. So it's institutional, it's financial, it's inside computers, and it's inside people. It's all at the same time. What would be the preventive mechanism? So we talked about all this, and as I said, it's more complicated than I had a chance to unpack. And if someone decides to dye their hair, you need to think about why you're doing it and what purpose it's serving, and then it's your decision. It was my mother's decision. I could say something because I was her son. But you know, it's a personal decision taking into account all the variables that we don't normally take into account. Because it's so deep in the culture that we don't see it. It's like the fish in the water. the preoccupation with youth and physical fitness and certain standards of beauty is like sick in this culture, if I could say that. And then we all internalize it. So read the autobiography of Malcolm X and see how people of color used to straighten their hair because looking white was more valued in their own community and in the white community. I'm not saying someone shouldn't straighten their hair now. I'm saying maybe the way they did it 20 years ago was a different reason than the way someone does it now, and just to have consciousness of what you're doing. I use a lot of examples of racism because I think we become more conscious. We're not done by a long shot, but we have more understanding of how racism works. And so we can use examples to make parallels. I think it's actually harder to talk about indigenous issues because this country was founded on inequality in that arena. So we already talked about this. And so then we would ask, are elder abuse bystander scenarios different from other violent situations? So that goes back to your example of paying attention to the role of the caregiver. So we need to create scenarios that are appropriate and then do role plays. And then, by the way, if you think about it, so let's take that example the deputy mayor gave us. I don't have a lot of money, but I'm getting money every month and I'm supposed to be giving it to Jenny's mother. And you're my neighbor. And you see I'm buying things that I supposedly don't have money for. What's going on? Maybe I'm dealing drugs, right? There's a lot of possibilities, but you know that my financial behavior is not correlated with my legal income. That's a warning sign. So if we think through all these things, we start like knowing what all the warning signs are and educating people about them, which is why I encourage you to debrief cases from a point of view of prevention. I saw this great flow chart Vera House has. That's, is the person willing to receive self? Is the person in danger of physical harm? And you go through all these things. You have to do that. But when you're all done, and it's been resolved for the moment, and there's not a danger of harm, now you sit down and say, well, who were the bystanders? Who knew this? Who didn't do anything? And now you go through the whole thing again from a prevention point of view. And then maybe you even have an opportunity to talk to those people. So I say to Tammy, did you notice how did Jenny buy that new car? And you get other people involved. Does that make sense? So just to let you know, the social norms approach is very proven. Proven means experiment controlled trials and all that. It's very proven for substance abuse, and it's considered a best practice for sexual assault prevention, and now it's an untested and unresearched but science-based practice for elder abuse. Most of the studies relate to sexual assault prevention for bystander intervention, and there's almost no applications to elder abuse prevention from the point of view of the research. Fear tactics and legalistic approaches are not effective. I'm sorry because we all do this, including I used to do it. Don't put up pictures of elders with bruises. We all do it because it's like we want to get people's attention, but focusing on the negative or scaring people doesn't work. Actually, I'll have to give you, there's one situation in which fear works. Pretend I'm doing something that could hurt me, like I'm engaging in unsafe sex, or I'm driving too fast on the 81. I don't want to get a ticket, or I don't want to get AIDS. I have to be afraid of something happening. I have to have something I could do to prevent it, and I have to feel that I could do it. Then fear works. So you know what I do to avoid a speeding ticket? I set the cruise control at 9 degrees, 9 miles over, because the troopers give you a little. I'm not encouraging anyone to drive fast, but I know what the parameters are. So I engage in protective behavior, and I know that I could do it. So fear sometimes works in very limited situations, but it doesn't work as a general tactic. Because if you smoke cigarettes, you already know what the warning is. If you drink too much alcohol, you know what it's doing to your liver, but you're more concerned about like having fun at the party and fitting in with your friends who you think are drinking more than they really are. So it's not addressing like the primary motivation. So the research is that fear tactics don't work and information campaigns don't work. So if you have a workshop and then you say myth, fact, I could get all of it right and it doesn't change anything. I hope I don't disillusion anyone, but you're in good company because we all went through all these disillusionments with alcohol and violence, other violence and everything. So, I already covered this with dyeing your hair so that people will treat you differently. Women are much more at risk of sexual assault than men, but also gay, lesbians, bisexuals, and especially transsexuals, and poor people, women of color, blah, blah. So, let's say we have a workshop for all the women on this side of the room that teaches you what's a risky situation, what's the MO of perpetrators, how to defend yourself, including self-defense, and to not blame yourself if something happened. And you all get the workshop. The research shows that the women on this side of the room will be less likely to be assaulted. Very good research. Now we go over here. These women don't get the workshop. You're more likely to be assaulted. You didn't prevent me from raping. You just taught those women how to avoid me. That's why we call that risk reduction. That's not prevention. But we might have a moral responsibility to teach elders risk reduction strategies so that they can protect themselves from abusive situations. And in the case of elder abuse, I'm already thinking how it's different. If elder abuse takes place in families, and I'm going to steal money from my mother, and you do something that makes it harder, I'm not going to steal money from someone else's mother, because it's easier to steal money. So there are already going to be some differences, but the point of view is we have responsibility to do risk reduction, but that's not prevention.
Would you say that the audience for the elder abuse prevention, I'm thinking that was a more difficult audience as opposed to be wanting to learn about rape prevention?
Absolutely,
Because they're going to say that's not going to happen. More likely than...
Well, there's denial. There's denial involved in all these issues. But the denial, I would agree, is greater when it's around family issues. Because first of all, I don't believe that someone in my family would do that. And you don't believe that someone in our family would do that. You know, so I think that's why I said, like, smokers want to stop smoking, but drinkers don't want to stop drinking. Elder abuse is different. So you have to adapt it. And you have to figure out, because if I really trust my neighbor to give the money to my mother, they say, what's your problem, Ellen? You don't trust me? You know, it's like, I don't want to upset you because you're doing me a favor. So we need to say, well, I'm not doing it because of you, but other people might have access to my mom's bank account, and it's my responsibility because I have, you know, I'm the trustee. I have, you know, we have to, that would be part of the role play, to deal with the denial that comes around the family or the culture's beliefs about, so that's more, you will have more work to do now, because you have to figure out how to apply it to your situation. So that was a good example, thank you. Bystander intervention is subject to rebound, I already said that, so we need to teach skills and mentor them and practice them. Misperceptions of norm predict perpetration and intervention. So for instance, if I'm a sexual assault, what we call rape proclivity, I'm more likely than other men to sexually assault. Because I think that if women dress a certain way, they're available. Because if someone dances with me a certain way, she's interested. Because if we go back to our apartment and we take our shorts off, that means we have a green light to have intercourse. I really believe all that, which we know isn't true, because someone could decide how intimate they want to be. If I think that my friends agree with me, I'm more likely to perpetrate than if I think my friends disagree with me. I'm just telling you that sometimes when I tell you my opinion, I try and be honest and tell you that I'm telling my opinion, but almost everything I'm saying is based on the research. So, if I think my friends think that I have permission in that situation, then I'm more likely to rate. And if my friends think that the rest of my friends think it's okay, they're less likely to say something. But in fact, most of them don't agree with me. That's why I think the social norms approach is such an important prevention strategy. But it's only one piece of the puzzle. It's not everything. Preliminary research supports combining them. They're both more effective together than either alone. Because one of the barriers to intervening is misperceiving what other people feel about the situation. But if in the sexual assault field we have all these canned bystander intervention programs and everyone's trying to sell them to everyone. And they haven't caught up with the research, so they don't include a normative feedback component. So we talked, you could intervene at different levels of the system. As I said, we need to go through these stages. And the denial might make it harder to do this. Because it's like my brother would say, what's your problem? You don't trust me? And we get into a sibling issue that I want to see my mom's bank statements. We didn't have any problems in my family when my mom was older when she died, but we could have, right? I mean, everyone could have. But actually, if I think that we could, it's less likely that we would than if I pretend that we wouldn't. Right? So what is the event? So we said the event is change in daily behaviors, change in relationship to gatekeepers, change in use of money. We need to, you already all know the events, but now you need to know who are the bystanders to those events. And we already went through the reasons. So I'll add something.
There's a question.
Yes, thank you.
It's also very hard in terms of denial. For instance, you tell an elder, it's not right what your son is doing to you, just very exploitative.
Right.
And to have the elder say, make excuses, well, it's okay because this reason.
Right.
And it breaks your heart when you know what's going on, but the person refuses help, and there's
Right.
really nothing you can do.
But there might be something you do, because instead of saying it's not right, you might say, I see you bought a new car. Like, did your mom pay for that? In other words, you could go at it from the side and go around behind and say, have a conversation that exposes the contradictions in the person's excuse. So that's a good example where you're defining a problem, and we're taught to think that's only one solution to the problem. Like, that's not okay. But there might be another solution, which is to have a conversation. Or if someone says, I've been taking care of my mom, so I use her money to buy a new car, and I say, oh, I wouldn't do that because I'm stealing it from my brothers and sisters if I do that. See how that's different?
Yes.
Because I believe everybody has a conscience. Like you could call it a superego, which is what Freud called it, right? Or you can call it a values, or you could call it your soul, your heart, whatever you want to call it. Everybody has something inside that knows right from wrong. And if you tell me that's not right, you're putting me on the defensive. And in some cases that might be good. But in other cases, I'm going to shut you down. So that was a good point that you made, because you're brave, you're willing to step in, you're willing to do something, you're willing to call it what it is. But now we could maybe have a different technique that would be more effective. So thank you. So the research shows that if I need help and there's one person, I get more help than if there's two people. If there's two people, don't you think that's backwards? Don't you want more help from more people? Why is that? Because everyone's wondering about all this stuff. So we need to get rid of all this noise. We need to know, you would respect me if I intervene. I can intervene in a way that doesn't put you on the defensive or embarrass you. that most people are also concerned, even though they're not saying anything, that I could do it and stay safe. You know, if I'm, elder abuse is different, but in other forms of violence, you might be afraid of receiving violence if you intervene. So then you intervene in a roundabout way. Thank you.
I know a lot of times with my clients, I really experience like financial abuse. A lot of the times if an older person goes into the hospital, you oftentimes hear about, you know, the family and friends taking money. What would you say is the best way to intervene without affecting the family dynamic?
Well, that's a catch-22, right? Because in some way, you
In some
can't
way it will
intervene
affect.
without affecting the family dynamic, because the family dynamic is what allows the abuse.
Right.
So maybe we need to say, how do we ethically intervene in a family in a way that's healthy for the family and the elder, that addresses the unhealthy dynamic?
Right.
It depends on the situation, but
Yeah.
for instance, are you a therapist?
I'm a care manager for
Okay.
adult health homes.
So if you're talking to the elder, you could give them options. You could say, do you know that we could set it up so that one of your children gets your bank statement each month? Or that we do this to this and this. So if that elder is hinting to you that one child is taking advantage of them and they feel guilty about it, you could say, well, what would you like to do with that money if it was yours? Oh, I want to save it for all my children. Oh, so Alan is using it now and he's taking it away from your other children. Is that okay with you? No. Well, what if we did this? In other words, we don't just say that's not right, even though we know it's not right. We have to work the situation.
So just becoming a part of the conversation.
Right, becoming a part of the conversation. And then, because you're a caregiver, this is very delicate, so I don't even want to talk out of hand. If you're a caregiver and I'm using more than my share, and my brother comes, and you have confidential information, what can you do? But if I'm driving up in a brand new car, you could say to my brother's Adam, I see Alan just got a new car. Like you can kind of plant seeds. It's ethical to say that because the car is public,
Right.
right? So you just have to become more sophisticated. We have to teach everyone else to be more sophisticated about how we can intervene and do something when it feels like we can't do anything. Because then you're bound by client privilege. You have all these things that... I learned this when I worked at Hobart William Smith, which is I could talk about anything that's public, and I can't tell anything that's private. So if somebody told me something in private and you already know it in public, I could say, did you see how drunk so-and-so got at the party? Because you don't know that they told it to me in private, but we all saw it. So, see, so once we start working the public-private thing, and maybe the people in this room know something that the people in that room don't know. So we could talk it about with each other, but we can't tell them. So you can make a comment like, let me just figure it out. You could say to my brother, since your mom came into our facility, your brother's been dressing a lot nicer. Or I noticed he got a new watch, because that's public. So it's just we have to figure it out, because we have the information. Yes?
I work at a financial institution, so we've actually had people from like a caregiving standpoint kind of call us, and obviously we can't give any information or anything, but plant seeds in our head, so that we sort of monitor that member's account a little bit more.
Right, and then
we're
you
able
notice.
to do restrictions, we're able to do different things, especially if someone on an account is writing checks and signatures no longer match, and people
So they're
on the
tipping you
account-
off.
Yes.
So that's important. And then they can't get pissed off at you when you won't give them information.
Right.
Because that's not fair to you. But you could say to my brother, you know, I really can't tell you anything, but if your mother would sign this form, then I could tell you everything. Right? So you need to know how to get to where you want within the constraints
Right.
of confidentiality and legality and all these other things. And also culture. Because in some cultures, how you react is very different from in other cultures. Good questions. So, we already looked at this, right? And it's the research is overwhelming that perceptions predict behavior. Gamblers think everyone gambles more. Domestic violence perpetrators think that more men use violence than they really do, etc. You know, so we're all staying, a lot of us are staying here. So I didn't look, but usually the hotels have this card about how much they care about the environment and blah, blah, blah. I don't believe it. They have a big laundry bill. Like I don't always trust corporations. But you know what they found out? If you put a card in the bathroom that says X% of our guests reuse their towels, people are more likely to reuse their towels. But you can't make it up, right? You have to do it. And it's very successful. You know, I won't go any further. There's a website called socialnorm.org. It has all the research, and then my own stuff is on my website. And we went through this. Right? So these are some examples from the research. People underestimate people's willingness to intervene, discomfort, sympathy for victims, respect. Leaders, we call them carriers of the misperception. And it's in everywhere. In some of my presentations, I show a list of all the journals which have published research on the social norms approach and all the countries in which it's been published, and it's really overwhelming. So like you can feel confident that this is an effective, science-based prevention strategy that you can adapt and use for elder abuse. But it might not work because we haven't figured out how to do it, but it doesn't mean the strategy is wrong. But if you use a strategy that doesn't have any evidence, you're not being responsible. Like DARE in the crash car in high school. DARE doesn't work. I'm sorry if anyone likes DARE, but every 5 years DARE is evaluated and it doesn't work, so they revise it and it doesn't work. And the crash car doesn't get people to not drive while intoxicated. So how much effort does it take to put a crash car in front of the school? To give the state troopers, I mean, think of all that. And why do we do it? Because we're so upset we want to feel good that we're doing something. So we want to do something, and then people cry, and then we feel we're doing something, but it doesn't do anything. We haven't even gotten to the point with elder abuse where we're making all those mistakes, right? Because it's hidden. So you have the advantage of not repeating all of our mistakes. So next time I come on I-81, I don't see a big sign of an older person with bruises. Because even though that happens, and that's why we're here, that's not going to prevent it. I'm self-employed, so I can be a big mouth. Anyway, I'm from New York, which people think, right? Okay, so let me give you another example. We asked guys, do you agree or disagree? There's only women who dress suggestively that are raped. So you see, 79% say that they disagree, but only 44% think that most guys disagree. Let's say this was a neighborhood, right? Like we all were neighbors. And I gave you a survey and I said, if you saw the following situation, how comfortable would you feel in a meeting or doing something or talking to someone? And you give 1 to 10. And then I said, how comfortable do you think most people in this room would feel? 1 to 10. Then we pass in all the papers and we pass them back. So now you're holding someone else's paper. So I say, raise your hand if the person who filled out this paper said that they would do something. And Terry raises her hand. But she's not raising her hand for herself, so it's confidential. And now we say, raise your hand if this person thought that most people in the room would also do something, and Terry doesn't raise her hand. And that's true for most of you in the room. I could say, what's going on here? Most of you would do something, and most of you would think that no one would do something. That's a great technique to do in a workshop, because you bring the truth out in the open. And you also get people thinking about, well, we all see each other every day, but we don't know what we're thinking. We're polite to each other when you see me walking the dog. We exchange our pleasantries. But I still think you wouldn't do something and I would. And you think I wouldn't do something and you would. So, more examples. And we know that people don't intervene because they think other people aren't concerned. And we know that the people who do the abuse are more likely to think that other people are innocent. And they're more likely to do it when they think other people are upset. And in social psychology it's called a self-serving bias. It gives me an excuse to justify my behavior, which reinforces the denial. So, I'm the oldest in my family. So pretend my younger brother really looks up to me, and he's in denial about certain of my habits, because he wants to put me on a pedestal. I don't think that's true, but pretend. And now you want to talk to him about, like, I'm spending my mom's bank account. His denial of being a younger brother is going to prevent, right? So then I get away with it. And I think I'm a great older brother, and I still have a new watch. Okay, so we did this. And we did this. So, you know, we could just have more examples, right? So someone comes to the hairdresser, and they say, you know, I used to see Mary every day, but she hasn't been coming out for her walk. And the hairdresser may or may not say if it's confidential. That's interesting, she didn't come for her last appointment with me. So then what's the hairdresser going to do? The hairdresser says, I think it'd be a good idea if you talk to the other neighbors and see what they're noticing. Because maybe there's something gone. And maybe someone says, oh, Mary's been in the hospital for a week. Okay, end of discussion for the moment, unless it was from abuse. But let's say Mary had like a cataract surgery, or, well, you don't have to go. You know what I'm saying? Something legitimate. But if you teach everyone to do that, then maybe 9 times out of 10 it's something legitimate, but you catch the 10th when it's not legitimate. But you can train the hairdresser how to encourage the bystander to talk to the other bystanders. And how to do it in a less confrontational way. So confrontation is when you say, I don't like that, or that upsets me, or you shouldn't do that. And that's okay. But in many situations that doesn't work. And as I said, you could not participate, you could change the subject, or you could say something about your own experience that contradicts. This is very powerful when I work with the military, because rank, right? So pilots, if you're flying an airplane, you wear what's called a jumpsuit, which is a little tight-fitting. So if you're shapely, it shows your shapes. So pretend I want to make a comment about a female pilot's body, but I know I can't say certain things I used to say 10 years ago when I entered the Air Force, because it was much more overt. So I say, Captain Jane looks really good in her flight suit today, and I kind of make a little wink. And you're my subordinate, what are you going to do? You say, I hear she aced her flight check, which that's a way of saying she's a great pilot. Or you say, I hear she won the sharpshooter award, or she won the top, whatever. The point is, you contradict. If enough people do that, I'm not going to say it anymore. I still might go home and abuse my mother, right? In secret. But, so I'm just saying, it's many things all at the same time, and not any one thing. Or you might have a conversation and say, well, what do you think of Captain Jane? And and then we have a talk, and they say, I hear she aced her flight check, and blah, blah, blah. And in the course of the conversation, I portray her differently in a way that her physical characteristics are not relevant to her flying, a fighter plane.
In a circumstance like that, so he's saying that in a group, and so he knows with that group of people he can't speak that way. But then he goes down the hall and they feed into it, like, yeah, she looks great
Right.
in that suit.
Well, really, but actually only 2 people feed into it, and everyone else thinks that everyone agrees. Now, but still, you're right. But then eventually those, in other words, you have to start somewhere and you have to spread it, because now we're talking about culture change. We're not just called about getting a warning when there's extreme withdrawals made from a banking account. So certain things can happen more easily than others, but over time, or maybe at one point I get promoted, and now I can tell me, you see what I'm saying? I'll tell you a great story, even though I don't have time. When I was working with the National Guard in one state, there was a sergeant that had a really sexist leader, and he was, if I ever have to work for a woman, he was just terrible. And she went to officer school, and she became a captain. And when she was ready to be assigned, she said, I want to be assigned to his unit. Because now she was his boss, and he resigned. I love that story. Okay, but the point is, you're right. So, or else you have a conversation, right? But the point is, you have to start somewhere. So then maybe, okay, let's work that a little more. I'm in group A, and we intervene. And you're in group B, and you're in the silent majority. And you don't say anything because someone's enabling the leader, and you think most people agree with the leader. So I say to you, did you notice that Captain Berkowitz likes to always make comments about the female pilots' bodies? And you say, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And then we talk about it, and now you're aware that other people might agree with you. So now you talk. So in other words, I use my experience to help you be a social change agent in your group. And now you talk to other bystanders and you find out that in reality they're upset too. And then we tell you what worked in our group. So that's how you spread it. But you're right to be aware of the barriers or the challenges. So someone says, you're very, very old. And they say, thank you for the compliment. Imagine saying that. That's a paradigm shift. Would we say that? Why not? I've learned a lot in all these years. Keep working, it will keep you young. I stopped trying to be young years ago. When my wife and I spoke at an elder abuse conference in Toronto, which is how Jenny found out about me, we each did keynotes, and then we role-played these in front of everyone, and it was so much fun. I would have to lose so much wisdom to be young. Now, I didn't think of this like on the spot. But if you work it, you'll think of great things. He can't just think for himself anymore. Really? Last night he beat me up really bad. Just to give you an idea. So, here we are again, right? And we go through all the options. So, the gatekeepers in this case are critical bystanders. So, we designed a sexual assault prevention program that was using all these principles, and it was freshmen men in a dorm received it and other guys didn't receive it. And the men in the dorm that received it perceived that their peers would be more likely to intervene, including the men who were perpetrators. So I perceive that you're willing to intervene against me, and you will perceive that you're all more willing to intervene. This is the one that had the 4 months. Receive less reinforcement from peers for sexually aggressive behavior, including the sexually aggressive men. Associated less with sexually aggressive peers. It's like, now that we had a workshop where both guys said how they really felt, no one wants to hang out with me. Because I think it's okay to brag about my sexual exploits. And now you all know that you don't like it, so you hang out with each other and not me. Okay, so how do we do this with elder abuse? How would create a neighborhood in which most people perceive that most people were willing to intervene, in which people didn't reinforce people who spoke about their parents in problematic ways, etc., etc. And this I showed you, this is more detail. 83% of boys agree that they don't like to hear trash talk. So here's the poster we made.
We need to wrap.
I knew that. Good. You're interviewing with my watch. Okay. So this is the end. Start where you are, which means elder abuse is not where sexual assault prevention is. Identify critical ingredients such as bystander intervention and norms correction and infuse them across programs. Ensure consistent messages and outcomes. Design multiple programs that are interactive in single district and adapt to your issue. That was close.
Thank
Thank you all.